Welcome friends to another r/maliciouscompliance video. If you're not a malicious soul, then help support the channel by hitting the like and subscribe buttons down below. That said, our first story of the day is by Mother of Crim. Take my front row seat and tell me to just sit behind you? If you insist. During halftime at our local high school's football game, we went to the concession stand to get some food. Now, I didn't think it would be an issue because we were sitting with a group of people, but I laid my stuff out on the bleachers anyway. However, when we got back, we were met with a group of middle-aged people and a rather elderly lady sitting in our spot and my stuff tossed to the side. Now, usually I'm an extremely nice person, to the point that people are always yelling at me for being too nice and getting taken advantage of, but this week I have had enough. I'm sick of being taken advantage of and done dealing with people's well, you know. I stood there for a minute and said, this is our seat. You took our seat and that's extremely rude. The leader of the middle-aged ladies, who we'll call Karen, snapped back, they said no one was sitting here, so sorry, but made absolutely no attempt at moving. To which my husband said, yeah, you really look sorry. Karen motioned behind her and said, there's room back there. However, there was only one small section of bleacher directly behind her and between our entire group. I thought about it for a second and realized that arguing wasn't going to get us anywhere and that would make us just look bad. So I smiled to my husband and said, okay, let's squeeze in here. It was like he could read my mind in that second and knew exactly what was about to happen. So my husband and I, along with our 4 children, squeezed right up and beside Karen. As anyone with kids or anyone that has ever seen kids knows, you can probably see where this went. These kids were running on pure sugar, adrenaline, and school spirit after a long first week of school. And I made sure the youngest, a 6-year-old boy, sat right next to me, directly behind Karen in her large bleacher chair she had set up. Did I also mention that the reason we were sitting up front is because kids can't sit still? These kids like getting as close as possible to see the game, but also enjoy coming back to us to sit and talk for a bit. In any other situation, I would have made sure my kids were respectful and courteous of those around us. I would have put a stop to the screaming when our team scored, the jumping up and down, chanting with the cheerleaders, running between us and the fence. But not this night. I think it took Karen all of 5 minutes to realize her mistake. The cringing from the screams right behind her, the leaning from side to side when they were standing at the fence blocking her view, the 6-year-old happily swinging his feet back and forth, oblivious that he was repeatedly kicking the back of her seat. Karen was getting audibly and visibly annoyed from it all and kept giving me dirty looks as if to say, control your children, where I'd just shrug and look at my husband and say, I try to tell her. One by one, those in Karen's group started to leave, but Karen held on the longest and still only made it about half an hour before she decided she couldn't take it anymore and left. No, I'm not a complete monster. I made sure my kids didn't bump or bother the elderly lady, and I even asked Karen to move her purse she had put behind her before it got stepped on. But even that was met with a scoff. Maybe next time though, Karen will think twice before stealing seats from kids because she might get more than she bargained for by inviting us to squeeze in behind her. If somebody stole your seat right in front of you and you knew your kids could act up and ruin that experience for them, would you innocently let the kids run amok and ruin it for these seat stealers? Let me know in the comments down below. Our next story is by Perception95156. Don't eat out if you can't afford it. Okay, we won't. At the time, I had just moved from a small village in Europe. When I moved to Canada, I met up with others from my tiny area in Europe. Being from the same little country, we all became close. I had become friendly with a next-door neighbor who was a waitress at a mid to high-level restaurant in this town. She told me I should stop by, so I did. I brought my friends along and it became a thing, where 9 to 12 of us would come in and eat and be served by her. At least one a week, every single week, often 2 times a week. I asked if that was okay, but she never seemed overwhelmed, and we often caught her just chilling out of the front desk when she was done with the initial plates. More on that later. Again, we're not from a tipping country, so initially I was going to tip 15%. Then I was graciously informed by the host that an auto 18% tip was added to the bill for groups larger than 6. Okay, great. Didn't have to figure out how much to tip. After almost 3 months or so of this, she stops by as I'm taking out my trash. One thing to know about her is that she seems nice, but also has no tact, and can have a bossy demeanor. She tells us she enjoys having us as customers and loves seeing us enjoy the food, but that we should be tipping 20% minimum. Heavy emphasis on the minimum. Also, good tippers would give at least 30%. I'm a bit stunned that of all the things she talked about, it was that. So I simply say, I'm sorry, okay. She finishes off with her signature sweet smile and the words, "Sorry, hun, if you can't afford to eat out, then you shouldn't be doing so." Now, if she was polite and said something like, "By the way, it's customary to tip so-and-so if we do a good job. I understand you might not know the customs here," then I would have understood. But many times, I remember she was inattentive as a waitress. We'd often have to flag her down after making eye contact, where she'd just wait behind the counter. Like I said, 20% was not out of the question, it was the way she said it. So I mentioned this encounter to my friends, and after a little talk, we realize we can't afford that. Nah, not if we also want to be able to purchase other goods such as fine wines, cheeses we love, and the like. See, we aren't poor, but not rich either. These weekly dinners were little luxuries that we splurged on for the sake of friends and feeling special in a fancy restaurant. It didn't break our bank, but it was still a significant amount of money. To tip her properly, and the fact that we all realized there were other little things in life we'd rather spend our precious money on, we decided it was too much. Across all of us, it was hundreds in dollars in tips alone per week. That's a lot for us. We could use that money to rent a pool hall, fishing tours, which are very expensive, etc. So we did what any responsible adult did. We stopped buying what we couldn't afford. It was far cheaper to host our gatherings in someone's house and do a potluck or make a deli board, etc. Now, discussing this with other neighbors, I hear that she said something similar to other people in the neighborhood. Invite out to eat, then tell them off later if the tip's too low. They've always said the same thing, 20% minimum, service wasn't the best, very hurried, not very attentive, etc. And the entitlement. Anyways, we stopped eating at the restaurant and having her as the waitress. Mind you, I never stopped saying hi to her, I kept up my pleasantries, etc. But now, after we all of a sudden stopped coming in, she had a scowl on her face when she'd see me, kept her responses quick and stopped saying hi as much. And then after about a month after we stopped, one of the other neighbors mentioned to me how she was complaining that her tips weren't great anymore and that she couldn't afford her to get more fillers for her cheeks at the new medical spa down the road. Oh well, like you said, don't eat out if you can't afford it. I think this just goes to show you that when you start getting too greedy, it can fall apart really quickly. If you got something good going and the return is pretty decent, most of the time it's probably safer to just keep that going as long as it can go, rather than try and push it even further in the hopes of making even more money. Our next story is by Chicken Noodle Discharge. Need another doctor's note? No problem. I'm a 23-year-old male, and my 51-year-old mother is a paralegal at a pretty big law firm. Each attorney has several paralegals under them, and one of them is the manager of the rest. If one paralegal is out, the manager takes up their work as well as their own. My mom had the same manager for several years and never once had any issues. This year, OG manager retired, and back in May, her new manager was brought in from another section. To say this new manager, we'll call her Nancy Mancy, was a witch would be an understatement. Nancy immediately changed almost every single policy and micromanaged every single task. She constantly had sly remarks and would tattletale every single slip-up to the attorney. This got so bad, the attorney actually told the entire section he doesn't want to hear about any more workplace drama or small slip-ups at all. Now that the stage is set, on to the build-up. My mom found out she had a small tumor on her ovary that needed to be checked and removed. Biopsy was taken and found out it's not cancerous and can be removed with little to no issue. The doctor told her it would be a one-day recovery. She went to Nancy and asked for the 2 days off. No problem, just bring a doctor's note. My mom got the doctor's note and turned it in without issue. 3 days prior to the actual operation, they do her pre-op and find out that it can't be removed as easily, and she has to have a partial hysterectomy. Now her doctor says it's going to be about 2 weeks bed rest. Mom informs Nancy. Nancy's pissed and says she needs another doctor's note. No problem. My mom calls her doctor's office and they use a program to edit the existing one to say 2 weeks instead of 2 days. They fax it to my mom and she gives it to Nancy. Now, the program medical facilities use to edit these types of documents is also used by paralegals. Nancy sees this note and immediately accuses my mom of editing the document herself just to get more time off. She then demands to have the doctor's office number. My mom calls them and explains the situation. The nurse talks to Nancy and agrees to get a new note made. Here's the malicious compliance. Nancy demands my mom go in and get the original and not a faxed copy. Nancy states, "We need the original since this whole situation has been shady. We're gonna do this by the books." My mom goes to the doctor's office, clearly upset. When she gets there, the nurse tells her she's entitled to 8 weeks of state short-term disability. She immediately fills out all the paperwork and takes it to her local disability office. Because of the short time frame, it's pushed through. The next day, she returns to work with her note for 2 weeks off and her 8 weeks disability paperwork. Nancy is pissed. My mom just says, "You wanted this done by the books. This is what the book says I get." Now Nancy had to do 10 weeks of extra work, just because she gave my mom a hard time about doing 2 weeks of extra work. Since my mom's been back, Nancy's given her no problems at all. Obviously, most of this was motivated by Nancy not wanting to do extra work all that time, and honestly, I can kind of understand it in just the sense of who wants to do 2 weeks of extra work. The bottom line is, though, that it was very frustrating for OP's mom, and when having to go through the process because of it, they found out they're entitled to way more time off. So, hey, why not take it, right? And our final story of the day is by Reverend Bull. Medical billing wants to talk to Dad? Okay. Long story short, Dad died of ignored cancer about a month after diagnosis. About a week after he died, the first medical bills started coming in. He was newly unemployed, we hadn't set up Cobra, and this was before the Medicaid expansion. He'd had ICU, airlift, ambulance services, multiple doctors, and a number of other interventions that racked up a pretty penny. So the collections people were politely but firmly asking for their money. We had to explain to each separate agency, each hospital, each doctor, each transport, and more, that he was deceased and that his estate was being finalized, and that the debts would be resolved if they just gave us time. One day, the helicopter ambulance people called when we were especially sour. We'd just gone over numbers and gotten bad news, and we had told them before to give us time. "Hello, is this Dad's name?" I say, "No, this is his son, what can I do for you?" They say, "This is Air Ambulance Company asking about some outstanding costs. May we speak to him, please?" I say, "Sure, let me get a shovel." The caller paused, then it clicked, and with barely contained horror responded, "Take as long as you need. Our number is X. Thank you for your time." We did get a spend down in Cobra and it all got resolved with the estate, but for those first couple of months, I lost what little cool I had with the ghoulish, infernal device that is the American for-profit healthcare system. I think the saddest thing is I've heard multiple stories along the same line as what OP's experiencing. For some reason, you'll get multiple calls over and over about debts, whether it's an ambulance service, the hospital, even if they passed away at that hospital. And then not only are you getting the calls about the debts and the bills and stuff, but when you tell multiple people that they're deceased, they're no longer around, the debts are going to get settled and all that stuff, it always seems like the people on the other end go, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," click, and nothing ever gets updated or checked or verified. So it's like this endless loop of dumb people calling you up saying, "Hey, you owe us money." And it's the worst possible time for anybody to have to deal with that stuff, because they're most likely reeling from the experience of a loved one passing away. So I personally don't blame OP for anything that they did. It's a really tough, stressful situation, and if you lose it a couple times, you blow up at people a couple times, you probably shouldn't, but you understand why. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So of all these stories I've read today, which is your favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you haven't yet, if you could like and subscribe, that would mean a lot to me. Whatever you do, whether it's liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, all of it helps grow this channel, and I appreciate the heck out of it. So until next time, I'll see you all tomorrow with some more stories.